Hey everyone, it's Blake with FicheBait. In this video, we're going to walk through how to configure SAML Authentication with Entra ID, or previously known as Azure AD, in Laserfiche Directory Server. If your organization is using Entra ID authentication, this will allow you to use that same authentication within Laserfiche, so users can have a familiar login experience across your organization's apps. So to start with, we are going to be using a Laserfiche Answers post that was created by Samuel Carson from Laserfiche, where he has walked through the different steps as of now that need to be done in order to get Microsoft Entra ID configured as a SAML identity provider within Laserfiche Directory Server. So thank you, Samuel. Appreciate the information of how to do this. I will also post a link to that answers post in the comments so you can get to it easy. So first off, we recommend that you are on the latest version of Directory Server. I am using Directory Server version 12. You can also do this in Directory Server version 11. It may just look slightly different. It is recommended that you are at least on Directory Server 11 update 5 or higher, just because of some additional features that were added in during that update. So the first thing that we're going to do is in Directory Server, we are going to browse to Settings, STS Sites, and we're going to look at the STS site that we have configured here. If you don't have one configured in your Directory Server, go ahead and create one. It should look similar to what I have here or in the screenshot in the answers post that Sam posted. Essentially, you're taking whatever your FQDN is and you're using that in the addresses here. Also, don't forget to do the host name. Once you have all that done, we're going to switch over to the Entra admin. And from there, over on the left-hand side, we're going to select Applications and Enterprise Applications. Something to keep in mind is that Microsoft does update this interface on a regular basis. So what you're seeing here may be slightly different than what you're seeing when you're watching this video. So try to go through and figure out where it is that you need to go in order to set up this application within Entra. So once we have gone to Enterprise Applications, we're going to create a new application. So up here, we will click on New Application. And you can ignore all of these down here. We're actually going to come up here at the top again and click on Create Your Own Application. On the right-hand side, we get a little pop-out where you're going to name this application. Recommend naming it to something where you're going to know what it does. I'm going to name mine SSO Laserfiche Production. And then you'll also want to make sure that you have integrate any other application you don't find in the gallery, non-gallery selected. Once you have that, you can click Create. And then you'll be taken to your application page, your overview page. From here, on the left-hand side, you can click on Single Sign-On. And under here, we want to select SAML. And that will take us to the Setup Single Sign-On with SAML interface. The first thing that we want to do here is we want to edit the basic SAML configuration. So we're going to click on the Edit button here on the right, and we are going to be taken to this page on the right-hand side here. And we need to edit the identifier and the reply URL. What we're going to do is we will right now add a temporary ID So we're just going to add https example.com and add a reply. And we'll use the same URL. Okay, once we have that, we're going to click Save up at the top left. And then once it's saved, you have to click the X on the top right to get rid of this little window. And so that we can come back here to the main window. In the second section, the attributes and claims, we're going to click Edit. And we are going to add a new claim. So up in the top left, we're going to click Add New Claim. That takes us to a new page. And we're going to name this claim display name, all one word. And then for source attribute, once you click on that field, it gives you a drop down over on the right hand side. And we actually want to select user.displayName. And then once we have that, we're going to click Save. After you save it, you'll be taken back to the attributes and claims, and we're going to click on Add a Group Claim. In this part of Sam's documentation, he talks about a linked provider. We're not going to cover linked providers in Directory Server in this video. We'll have another video that will cover linked providers. So we're just going to do a standard basic implementation of using Entra ID as an identity provider in Directory Server. So from here, we're going to select security groups. And then for the source attribute, we will use the SAM account name. Once we have that, we'll click Save. And as Sam mentions in the post, it is important that Active Directory groups be included in the SAML token claims, or their membership will get ignored by Directory Server. So you need to ensure that all relevant AD groups are synchronized to Entra for this to work correctly. Also keep in mind that Microsoft has a limit of the number of groups that can be emitted in a token, and that is 150 for SAML assertions. So if you have users that are in over 150 groups, you may run into some issues with the correct groups being sent over to Laserfiche for those claims. So just keep that in mind. All right, so once we have that, we're taken back to our attributes and claims, and we can see the following information. Something to keep in mind is as we look at the additional claims, we have these claim names, and we're going to use those here in just a little bit when we go back to Directory Server. But just remember where these are, and we'll come back to it later. So now we're going to switch back to Directory Server. We are going to click on the Identity Providers tab, and we're going to add a new identity provider. Here we'll give it a name. I am just going to name mine Entra ID. We're going to keep it simple. And then for identity provider type, we'll choose SAML Identity Provider. We're going to keep Enable SAML Authentication to No, and we'll come back and enable that later. And then we'll go ahead and click Save. So that will bring us back to this page. And let's take a look at a couple best practices or recommended practices for using SAML authentication while we're in here. We'll switch over to the General tab, and if we scroll down a little, we come to a section called SAML Login Configuration. The first one here is the default landing page. This is the Laserfiche web application URL that should be the default destination for a user that starts from Entra via its app picker. So when they click on that app in the app picker, this is the URL that it will take them to. In my case, I have the URL for Laserfiche Forms selected. And so that's where they would be taken to if they click that within Entra. The second setting is the custom SAML entity ID. And what this is it's basically an identifier for the applications to know that this is the identity for the directory server. So if you set a custom one, it helps it so if you were to move directory server to a new server later on, it doesn't break because that entity ID is not changing. By default, this is the value that it's set to. So I just took the directory server host name and changed it to my host name, and that's the value that I have in there right now. All right, so let's go back to our identity providers, and we'll select Entra ID. And then next to Entra ID on the right-hand side, we're going to select Generate Service Provider Metadata. SAM has in here that it's a best practice to select 5 years in advance, or later on, so we're going to come in here and do that same thing. And we'll click OK. It may prompt you in the browser if you want to keep this. Go ahead and say keep, and that will download an XML file for you. If you were to open that file, this is what it has in it. So it just has information for the SAML service to know the different information about the directory server. From here, we're going to go back to the Entra Admin Center. Go back to our SAML base sign-on, and then click Upload Metadata File. And we're going to select that metadata file that we just exported from directory server. So we'll select that, click Open, and Add. And what that does is you'll notice now on the right-hand side, this is that basic SAML configuration that we went in and put the example URLs for. It's now populated that for us. It's also populated the logout URL for single logout. So once we have that, we can click Save. And then we can close out of that. And then we're going to come down here to the third section, which is the SAML certificates. In the third section, we just need to download 2 of these certificates, or 2 of these files. The first one is the base 64 certificate. So we'll click that, say keep. The second one is the Federation metadata XML file. So we'll click that and keep that as well. And then at this point, we're done with Entra, so we're going to go back over to directory server. And once we're in directory server, we are going to grab our certificate that we just downloaded and right click on it and say install certificate. We want to install it to the local machine. And then we want to place it in the Trusted Root Certification Authorities store. So we'll select that, hit OK, click Next, and Finish. Should tell you that it was successful. So then we can close that. And then once we've completed that, we're going to come back here to our Entra ID identity provider. We're going to change this to yes, and you can see all these different settings now that we have access to. So the first thing that we're going to do after that is we are going to upload the metadata file that we downloaded from Entra. So we're going to click the folder icon. Here is the XML file. So it will name it according to the application name that you gave in Entra for this. So mine was SSO, Laserfiche Production. When you download it, you can rename the file afterwards. That way it's a little more specific for you. And so I'm going to select that file and click Open. And then you also have to click Import Metadata. If you don't do that, it doesn't import the information. So once we click that, you can now see the different SAML provider settings have been populated automatically for us. Next to the certificate here, you'll notice that it now says configured signing certificate. If we click save and then come back, you'll notice that the certificate information is now populated for us. So that previously, that's just kind of like a placeholder. We have to save it before it finishes bringing in that information. All right, so next we need to come down here to where it says authentication context, and we need to update that value to this value. That value is in the answers post, so if you want to copy and paste, you can do that. What this does is there's an error that's common when you do these types of configurations with Entra, and this will help prevent that error from happening. You will see that there are other settings down here. We aren't going to cover a SAML single logout settings or signed request settings. You can read about those. We plan on having another video as well that will go through those settings. And then down at the very bottom, there is a service provider organization area where you can kind of customize what the button will look like. So you can change the color of the button or the text and some other information there. We're just going to leave ours the way that it is, and we're going to click save. Once we click save, we're now going to go to claims. With claims, if you remember, I said within Entra, we had some information in the attributes and claims area that we needed to pay attention to. And so if we look at these, we have some different URLs. This one just has a claim name, and we're going to use those now within Directory Server. So the first one that we need is email. So we're just going to find the email address one. We're going to copy and paste. The next one is first name. That will be the given name. Last name is going to be surname. And we don't have the department, but the next one is display name. That one doesn't have the URL, it's just the attribute name. And we'll paste that in there. And then we have groups, and we have that one right here. When you're doing this, Sam did provide a screenshot in his, and he also notes that those URLs could change in the future, right? So there's like a 2005 and a 2008. Those values could be updated in future versions of Entra. So make sure that you are coming in here and you're copying them directly from your implementation, just to make sure that you have the right one. All right, so we're going to leave this as unspecified. Again, we're not doing linked identity providers, and so we will click save. And that is pretty much all we need for the setup. The next thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that our user within Entra has the ability to use this application. So you do need to come in, go to users and groups. And once users and groups loads, you can come up here and click add user or group. Underneath users, I'm going to select none selected. We'll select my user and click assign. So you would do this according to your organization's setup, whether it's users or groups. Usually you're going to do groups and assign them that way. That is the easier way for that to work. Then we're going to come back to Laserfiche Directory Server and go to Accounts. We are going to add an account. So up here we'll click Add Users, and we're going to create a SAML user. So you'll assign it the group that you want that user to be a member of. I'm going to do administrators, and then make sure you select the correct identity provider. In this case, I'm using Entra. I'm going to give it the username, which in my case is blake.smith. And then the unique attribute is usually the full email address. So I'll select that. I'm going to give it the full license. We'll click Finish and OK. And now we need to test it. So I'm going to go ahead and open a new private window. We will browse to Laserfiche Forms. It will take us over to our LFDS STS login page, and you'll see down here I now have SAML Entra ID. I'm going to click that. It's going to ask me, how do I want to log in? Put in my credentials. And then we are. So you can see up here, I'm logged in. If I go to account, it's got my account listed here. Let's go back to Directory Server. And if we now select that user, you can see this user is tied to the Entra ID identity provider. And if we go to Profile, it was able to bring in the first name, last name, display name, and email address for this account from Entra ID. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you're able to walk through it. There are some more details within Sam's post in answers, so make sure that you take a look at that. We will create another video that talks about the single logout, as well as the linked identity providers. So be on the lookout for those. But hopefully you learned something. If you've liked it, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, keep phishing.